Hello, everybody, and welcome to your Every Other Day vlog with Andy with Be Libre. You see, I have my seatbelt on because I'm strapped in for this talk. We're gonna go at a crazy velocity to go back in time to the time of the Constitution. To be specific, when the United States Constitution was written. I'd like to think that the U.S. Constitution was a fork of the monarchy from Great Britain. And so today we're going to talk about forks in the real world outside of crypto. And the fork that we're going to talk about is the U.S. Constitution's fork from the British government. And forks are apparently a thing that have been happening since before cryptocurrency, since before Bitcoin. And so how did the fork work? How did the fork from, what was it, 100 years ago or so, work between the U.S. or the monarchy, the monarchy of Great Britain, and against the U.S.? Why did the U.S. decide to create a constitution to break off from the monarchy of Great Britain? It's mostly economically based. It's mostly an economically incentivized move or decision. Now, what most people don't realize is that the people that were in the position to make the decisions to break off from the monarchy of Great Britain were actually very well off. These were gentlemen. So our founding fathers were actually not. They weren't paupers. They weren't of the lowest class in the colonies. They were actually they were the I guess the elite. I guess the one percenters were the ones that decided to fork off from Great Britain. And we've very much romanticized that move by our founding fathers to secede from the monarchy. But truth be told, they did it for their very own economic interests. And unfortunately, the majority of the citizens, I guess, of the colonies, or we don't have to say citizens, we'll say colonists. So these were people that left Great Britain or left other parts of the world to come to the colonies, to try to make a better life there from whatever oppressive regime they were a part of before, only to become oppressed actually by those at the very top, I guess, wealth-wise, or at the very top of the societal and economic food chain in the colonies. So what am I saying? I'm saying that the fork that was created to secede from the monarchy actually didn't leave the majority of people in a much better place than they were before. And this is okay to think. It's okay. It's not. How should I say this? Our founding fathers have a lot of respect because they did create this idea that all men are created equal. And that's great and all, but notice how they left out a majority of the population. And by a majority, I mean at least half. That's women. So women were left out of the Constitution, as were men of color. Any race that was not white, unfortunately, was not included. The words white man aren't included in the Constitution, but it was at that time it was implied that any man of any other color was not to be included as somebody to be provided the equal rights that the Constitution was endowing. And that's very unfortunate, but that's okay. Our founding fathers weren't perfect. Nobody's perfect today. We're only trying to get better. And what did we learn? What should we learn from the past forks of our most recent history? Is that forks are just trying to make a better go of what preceded them. And no, this is not a talk talking about why Bitcoin Cash is a good thing, or rather why you should go on to Bitcoin Cash if it was a fork of Bitcoin. Bitcoin Cash is a fork trying to better what those who created Bitcoin Cash are thinking that they're getting something better. And that's fine of them to think. And we have to leave it up to the code to decide what really is in the best economic interest of the majority. We would hope that any fork that happens off of any coin is to better the majority, but oftentimes it's really not benefiting a majority. I know I've been jumping around a bit, but the point that I wanted to make was that we have had forks before. Uh, so segueing from the fork getting us away from, or rather the fork that ended up creating the U.S. Constitution by our founding fathers. We've now come around full circle, and now we have a fork off of the U.S. dollar, which is Bitcoin. So this is really just a metaphor. This is really just there. Obviously, the U.S. dollar is not cryptocurrency, so we're not having an actual fork. But I'd like to believe that Bitcoin is a fork of the U.S. dollar. Bitcoin is a fork out of the concept that fiat currency is the way to continue our economy, and I don't think it is. And Satoshi Nakamoto, in creating Bitcoin, obviously believed that there is a better way to do money. There's a better way to run your economy than to use a fiat currency. So, very interesting to see us come around full circle, where we had the Constitution create the United States of America, and shortly thereafter, the U.S. created its own currency to compete against the British pound. Now we have Bitcoin competing against the U.S. dollar, and of course every other fiat currency around the world. But obviously, because the U.S. dollar is the world reserve currency, we compare most new things, or we compare most things, most goods and services, to the dollar because it is the world reserve currency. But yeah, I just it was very striking to me to read a little bit about the history behind the U.S. Constitution and how it was the elite that decided to secede from the British Crown. And it was actually, I believe it was, from what I remember, it was one third of the colonists were in favor of seceding, one third were against, and the other third were ambivalent. They didn't really care. And that just goes to show you that there wasn't an actual mass consensus to create the United States of America. We very much romanticized with the U.S. how the U.S. came to be, when in reality it was the very few elite who were in a strong economic position to say, you know what, we don't want to pay taxes to the crown anymore, so we're going to secede from the crown and make our own government, and therefore prevent having to pay the kind of taxes that the crown was imposing on us colonists. We believe that we no longer need, or once the colonies realized, or once the elite in the colonies realized that life in the colonies could be self-sustained, that there was a self-sustainable life in the colonies, and they no longer needed the crown, they decided to secede. But I thought it was quite striking to find out that it was actually it was just a vocal minority that caused the secession from the crown. This is not to say that the U.S. was a mistake, that we should never have created the United States of America. I think we have come a long way, and of course there is so much merit in creating the idea, the concept of every man being created equally. Of course, in writing that's what it was, but in practice it was very much something else. I am optimistic, and I'm happy to see that we have progressed as a society. At least in Western nations, we have progressed in a way that we are living more and more true to the words of the Constitution now. But back then, that wasn't very much the case. So yeah, we now have a new fork of the previous fork. We have Bitcoin, which is forking off of the US dollar. It's very curious to see, and I'm very hopeful as to where we're going to end up from here. Please like if you like, please share with a friend, please subscribe, and talk to you soon. Goodbye.